Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and tonight we have guest Nadine Lalich. She entered the UFOlogy realm back in 2004, very skeptical after suppressing over 15 years of her own traumatic contact experiences. And in June of 91, while camping in Sedona, she was removed from a vehicle in fully conscious state by what appeared to be an intelligent, non-terrestrial life forms. So we're going to discuss many of her experiences and the works that she's recently came out with. Make sure to check out her website, alienexperiences.com. You can pick up her new book. Also, another one coming out in September called Alien Experiences 2. So, Nadine, it's a pleasure to have you on the show this year at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm great, Rex. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to speak with you. I always enjoy hearing people's testimonies on some of these just incredible phenomenons. You know, I mean, the UFO phenomenon has been around for so many years now, and many people today are starting to just wake up and get out of the suppression zone, I guess you could say, from hypnosis and hearing of other people's testimonies. So if you would, please give us a brief introduction about yourself, and then I'd like to jump into your book and your experiences that you've had with abductions.
Sure, my pleasure. Well, prior to this incident that took place in June of 1991, I really had very little interest or involvement in the UFO arena. I think as a teenager, I read some science fiction books, but it really wasn't a focus of my life at all. I'm also an artist and a writer, so I pursued those areas. And then as an adult, I spent 30 years in the legal field in a variety of positions. So when it came to the UFO phenomenon or the ET contact phenomenon, it just simply wasn't one of my focuses. Certainly was open to it, as I have many interests, but I didn't spend any time on it until that event took place.
Okay. And when I talked to you for a moment before the show, you said that you now realize you've been a lifetime contactee, correct?
Correct.
When was the first experience you remember?
Well, my first experience, there were things as a child that I was not able to relate to until years later when I looked back on it, after I began to process this mystery. But my original experience took place, as I said, in June of 91. I was traveling with a friend. It was a driving trip to Sedona, Arizona. I actually live in that area now, but I was driving from California, and we were going to do some camping in the Oak Creek Canyon area. And we were driving late at night, and we hadn't reached our destination, so we just decided to pull over for the evening. And we found what was actually a daytime picnic area that we drove into. And there were probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen places to park your car. There were a few places to have, there were grills there, and there was a restroom. That was the extent of it. There was no electricity there to hook up to. And there was no people there. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night when we pulled in. And as we settled in, we created a little fire in the grill, and we sat around the fire for a little bit, my friend Pamela and I. And I had a very strange, creepy feeling that we were being watched. Obviously, I couldn't see anything. There were no cars or people around anywhere, but I was uncomfortable. And I was driving in a van. And so we were just going to throw our sleeping bags in the back. We didn't set up a tent or anything and sleep in the back. So I retired first, laid down in my sleeping bag in the back of the van, and then I heard her come in a little bit later. Well, somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, I heard some sounds outside of the van to my right, just outside, as though somebody was walking around. I heard rustling, and I heard what sounded almost like footsteps around. And I sat up. Now, it was pitch black, because obviously there were no lights anywhere. And so I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, literally. And as I sat up, I was trying to listen more clearly to what was going on outside. And quite suddenly, the lights came on in the van. And when they came on, I was quite blinded at first from being in pitch black, and my eyes were trying to adjust. And as my eyes began to adjust, and of course I'm starting to fill with adrenaline and fear as to what's going on, someone's coming into the van, I see a hand reaching for me. And the first thing I notice is it's not a human hand. It's a very small, long, thin arm with 3 fingers and a thumb at the end of the hand. And it was so close to my face that even I could see the depression where we would have fingerprints. There was almost like a sort of a suction cup on the tips of these fingers. And it was a kind of a pasty gray color. Well, when you have no reference for that kind of event, even though I was fully awake, you still have great difficulty trying to reason with what's happening at the moment. Your brain is looking for answers, the adrenaline's rushing in your bloodstream. So then I had a momentary blackout total that was probably 3 seconds, 4 or 5 seconds. And the next thing I know, now my vision is much better. I'm standing outside with my back to the van. This was one of those, also one of the, it was a Toyota van where also the door lifted upward. So it was upward over me, overhead, and the lights were shining down on me from the door, and there were lights coming from inside shining against my back. I was barefoot, standing rigid. My arms were at my side, and my chin was tucked down so that I could not raise my head, and I realized I was paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. And again, of course, your brain is racing, trying to figure out what could be happening here. It's very surrealistic when it goes on, and you're looking for answers and asking yourself questions. And but this all happens with split-second timing. And because my head was tilted down and I could not see forward, I could see to the side where my hands were hanging. Slightly off to each side, I could catch out of my side vision what looked to me like 2 children without hair on their head. And again, without any reference to this kind of phenomenon at that point in my life, I certainly wasn't thinking E.T. I didn't know what it was. They were very small, and I could only see the top of them and straight down, and again, just the edge from my side vision. I could feel the presence of someone in front of me, although I could not raise my head, but it felt like a large person. Very large entity person. I could feel the energy. It was massive. It was not like these 2 small ones. Anyway, I look down and I see these little entities put their little hands underneath my hand, not even touching my hand, but sort of like cupping their hand under mine, and I felt my body raise up off the ground. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 inches. I was certainly raised up. I actually could feel myself levitating up. And then we began to move forward. As we moved forward, I still could not raise my head, completely paralyzed, but upright. I could see again from the side vision as we moved through, and I could still see the light shining from behind me with the van door open. I could see more of these small little beings off to the side watching. The next sense that I recalled was I could not raise my head, but things were hitting my face. Something kept hitting my face and my body as we were moving through, and I could see we were like moving through the forest, sort of, and something kept hitting my face. Later on, I realized what was hitting my face was branches. So some of the low-lying branches did not hit them because they were so much shorter than me, but they were hitting me at the top of my head. Then
they were transporting you through the forest, essentially.
Correct. Then I blacked out. The next memory that I have is of feeling like I'm being dropped, and a big loud whoosh sound, and I come bouncing onto the top of my sleeping bag inside the van with the door closed in pitch black. My legs are folded crisscross as they were exactly as when I first woke up. And I'm sitting back in that same position, upright. And I literally feel physically like I've just been dumped right back on top of that sleeping bag. And drenched in sweat, completely panicky. I had like a night t-shirt I was wearing, and I was drenched to the bone, shaking, on the verge of hysteria, crying, attempted to wake up my friend. At that time, it was somewhere around 3:30 in the morning, so I know it was about an hour that it happened, that I was gone, and I could not wake her up. And I did everything I could, shaking, calling out to her, nothing would rouse her. And I found myself in an amazing state of mind because my whole reality was altered suddenly. And I kept looking out the window, and what I knew is this was the thing that kept coming back to me. They're coming back. They always come back. They're coming back. They always come back. And I waited till dawn, and the sun came up. And I mentioned some of this to my friend, and as soon as it came around 5 o'clock, she just woke up Anyway, we discussed it just a little bit. And as we went outside, one of the things that was very disturbing is when we had gone to bed at night, because there was no one anywhere around, we had emptied out the van in order to sleep in the van. And so everything was outside. Okay. The tent, all of the Coleman, the equipment, the lantern, everything was outside. And we each had backpacks and towels and things like that. And so all of my personal belongings that I had brought with me were sitting on this picnic table, and we're out there. Now, when we got up, and I was quite shaken, and we were having our coffee and talking, I noticed that my belongings were gone. And what was odd about that, it was only my belongings that were gone. Nothing else was missing. Hers was not missing. And I mean, everything right down to my shoes that were sitting on the ground, my towel, I had a towel laid over one of the chairs. Anything that was mine was gone, including my backpack, all of my belongings. But hers were there. The food was there. The equipment was there. Everything else was there. So that was very disturbing. And we searched all over the area, trying to see if we could find it. And I was doing all kinds of imagining because I was filled with fear. I've been a student of the mind for many, many years. And it's always been a fascinating subject for me, and I've done a lot of different types of training with my mind and learning about accelerated learning techniques. And, I'm one of those that goes into the sensory deprivation tanks for conscious contact. I do a lot of different things to stretch my brain and to try to understand. So I was trying to find in my mind, identify what this could be. Trying to find something that would give me a logical response, anything but what I ended up finding out it truly was. Anyway, that ended our trip. We went back home, and a big shift in my life took place.
Now, you said you go through certain deprivation tanks. What did you call it?
Sensory deprivation tanks. Many years ago, I've been involved in a lot of different programs over the years. And I've worked with a lot of others, mentoring in addiction, in family issues, and I've been a Science of Mind practitioner. I trained for 8 years. It's sort of an affirmative prayer technique. And so the workings of the human mind are very fascinating to me, and how we develop our personalities, how we create and construct our view of the world. All right. It's a big study of mine. So I had a lot of reference, and some of the tools, for example, is I've often use sensory deprivation tanks, and those are big tanks you go into, and you float in salt water, and you get rid of all outside sensory, which is vision, sound, and you float in about 10 inches of water enclosed in like an egg, and you it's Epsom salt. They have 500 pounds Epsom salt. So after a while, what happens is that as you float in the water, the water, which is also at the exact temperature of the human body, after a while of floating with no sensory input whatsoever, you even lose sensation of your body because you can't tell where the water begins and your body ends. Anyway, these kinds of techniques help you get into your consciousness to understand how consciousness works. And to get rid of all that extra stimuli, you are able to better focus yourself, concentrate. You can have amazing accelerated learning ability. For example, I grew up in Michigan. I used to go to the University of Ann Arbor, and they had tanks there, and they had televisions built right into the top of the tank. So you could actually shut off everything else but keep your vision. And they found that even in learning foreign languages or in learning certain skills in sports, that you can accelerate 75–80% of your learning when the brain has the ability to detach from extraneous information and focus. So being able to focus some of these things, and also I use things like, I use something called sound and light machines. They work on binaural beats with the brain. You program through your eyes and your brain. You help get your brain into the optimal brainwave state. For example, if I'm going to work on a project and I want to be able to focus, I can use my sound and light machine to help get my brainwave pattern into the best possible state for me to do that task at hand, whether it be relaxation, whether it be sleep. And so these kinds of tools I've explored. So with this experience, what's good is that I've probably mentored well over 100 people in different programs, and the experience that I've had has been a big variety. And a lot of it, again, is about how we view things, construct things, belief systems. So I was tapping through all of this different experience, trying to find, could this have been a hallucination? Okay, what does the form hallucinations take? Could this have been an extreme dream state? What is that all about, right? And I couldn't find any answers. I couldn't find anything that, you know, that matched any of my previous training experiences. And so everything inside of me, intuitively, even from the beginning, kept saying, this was real. You can't run away from this. It's time to look at this.
Do you remember how many of those grays that you saw?
Well, during the initial experience, I recalled seeing, if I would have seen off to the peripheral of my vision, I would say maybe I saw another 6 or 8 and then a 2. When I came back from this, it was really interesting is that I had a shift in consciousness, and it was so dramatic that I didn't want to even talk about this. And I didn't talk about this at all to anyone for 15 years, except for my one friend, Pamela. And I began to journal prolifically all of the experiences. But when I came back, I was just filled with such an absolute compulsion to move to the Southwest. I was living in Southern California. I went back, and within 7 weeks, I didn't own real estate, so it was easy at the time. And I packed everything up, sold everything, packed it up, and headed for the hills of New Mexico. And ended up didn't know anybody there, but I was driven. Ended up there, leased a house in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and began an intensive period of contact experiences of a variety.
I've been to Santa Fe and all throughout New Mexico, and it certainly is a mystical state. And for those that might want an opportunity to see a UFO or have a contact experience, that's probably one of the best states to live in. And I was curious to why so many of those abduction cases and people make contact with extraterrestrials in New Mexico, but it probably has a lot to do with, Los Alamos, Santa Fe, the different nuclear explosions and testing that took place in many of the areas out there, like Project Gas Buggy and others. So that's incredible. Now, you said that when you moved out there, you started making contact with other extraterrestrials as well then.
Well, originally when I moved there, my personality was shifting. Things were changing. If unusual fears began to develop that had never been there, because what I believe is that I believe the human mind seeks balance and truth. And that until we find that balance and live that truth, we've got all these things buried in our subconscious that can disturb us and motivate us in negative ways. So it was time for me to wake up and recognize this aspect of life, that we were not alone. And when I got there, I watched these shifts. Suddenly I was afraid, and this wasn't me at all. I was afraid to get in my car because I felt like somebody was in the back seat. I would come home at night and begin to check the closets. And I would wake up the middle of the night absolutely convinced that somebody was standing at the bottom of my bed and that it was one of these grays. So I saw this shift. Suddenly these awarenesses began to come to the surface because it was time. So I started experiencing and seeing more things. One of the things that began then is, you were asking about why a place like Santa Fe. Well, I now live in a pretty remote area now in northern Arizona. I eventually moved here. And I'm probably 40 minutes from where these experiences originally happened. Anyway, what you're talking about in these kind of areas, it's not like a major metropolitan area where you just have city after city after city. We've got one city plunked here and wilderness all the way around it. So, for example, for me to drive and go where I'm at to go down to Phoenix, it's going to take me an hour and a half with lots of empty space and wilderness between me. So when I moved to Santa Fe, if you know Santa Fe, what you've got is that it doesn't take long. 5 to 10 minutes, you're out of the town, and now you're in big open wilderness. So how convenient is that for abducting people? So what would happen once I got there, all of a sudden, it could be any time of night, 10 o'clock at night, I've got a burning desire to get in the car and drive outside of the city. And I do. I don't stop it. I can't stop the compulsion. And then, of course, missing time starts to come into play. Anyway, these things begin to exacerbate. And I eventually went to a hypnotherapist that was there in Santa Fe. And this was my first experience with a hypnotherapist. I didn't tell her what was going on. She had no idea. I just said that I was having problems with sleeping, and I thought it stemmed from this particular date. And we had a couple of experiences of she was trying to hypnotize me and get me back to that date and find out what the problems were. And we tried on 2 occasions, and I got some more information by going back to that. And what I did get was in the hypnosis, I was able to continue through those woods and see a bright light, very, very bright ahead of me. You could see it even though my face was looking down at the ground. And indeed, there was a craft on the ground. And indeed, we went in, and I was subjected to, as I later learned, so many others have been, to extensive physical testing.
What type? Could you talk to us about some of that?
It was very invasive. It was being laid down on a strange metal, looked like stainless steel slab, being examined from top of my eyes all the way, my genitals, everything. Every area of my body was examined. And it was terrifying. And there were grays, and there was a tall white that appeared to be the in command of the situation. The grays, over the years of experiencing these things, the grays to me do appear to be more automatons. There have been some occasions where I've seen and been able to receive input on a couple of occasions during contacts where I could see some individuality, but not much. Not much. Basically, they're almost like little robots running around. Anyway, that little bit of information was provided to me, and that was enough for me. I shut down. I endured the ongoing 15 years in a really ordinary life, especially I was working in the legal field, which is, certainly very left brain, analytical. And of course, ultimately, the ability to analyze is something that really has helped me tremendously to detach from some of the toxic emotions and to be able to look at it more clearly. Anyway, so the next 15 years, I just simply kept it to myself. And my desire was to understand, which has been part of my personality since I came to this earth. It's been, I really want to understand and learn what's going on around us, within me. So my way to fight back was to journal. And because I had done so many consciousness exercising events throughout my life, everything from classes to training, I think I was able to develop a much better ability to stay conscious for a longer period of time when these events took place. So the events over those 15 years expanded into a variety of events, 4 different kinds of levels of contact. There were physical effects from it, lost time from it. I came to understand that my father was involved in it also. I came to understand and reflect back on things that were very strange to me in my childhood that I came to understand that made perfect sense related to contact. And when I would have experiences, I would be determined to use all of my energy to stay conscious as long as I could. And as you probably know, most experiencers, they are rendered to some extent, unable to interact. They're subdued. Their consciousness is really short-circuited. So you may be able to see, respond, observe some things, but whatever it is that they do to us, depending on the circumstance, they take a lot of our willpower away from us. They obviously know how to work with the way the brain functions in order to keep us controlled. But I would fight those things. And I would say there's been times, and it may not sound like much, but I think it's a lot from my experience, that I could maintain or come in and out for at least 10 minutes before I would lose the experience. Because a lot of times contactees just get the beginning and they get the end. I wanted to see what was going on. I wanted to look at these beings. I wanted to look at their technology, and everything that I observed, I kept my books by my bed. And as soon as I was returned, had an experience, I was consciously able to, I wrote every single detail down, or I recorded them on my recorder, because the amount of information is staggering sometimes in what happens to me. Staggering. And I didn't want to miss anything. So that was how I was able to maintain a sense of control over an uncontrollable event.
Let me jump in here real quick, if I may. I have spoken with Barbara Lamb before. I had the opportunity to interview her a couple years ago, and just a great lady, wonderful energy. I know that she's a really good hypnotherapist. Was she one of the people that hypnotized you?
Well, I'm part of the process of, during events, they're very emotional. highly emotional events in your life attract more extraterrestrial attention. They're very keyed into that. My father passed away in 2000, and my mother passed away in 2004. I had a great amount of activity and unusual activity during those time periods. But right after my mother passed away, I was entering a period, because I had taken care of both of my parents. So I was entering a more stable, calm period without responsibility to others. And I hit the bottom and I said, that's it. I'm going to look into this. I'm done with this. This is no more going to be a secret in my life. I'm going to step out into the world and find out what's happening. And I would not read a book, watch a show. I didn't have anything to do with it for 15 years. 2004, I went to my first MUFON meeting, Mutual UFO Network. It was in Orange County. I went there a couple of times, and I was told there was a couple of psychotherapists. And I sought out Barbara Lamb. I finally met her there. I sought her out, and she's a very good psychotherapist. Now, I went to her offices, and we sat and we talked the first time, and one of the things I didn't want is I didn't want somebody to put their ideas in my head and tell me what this was. I wanted my own exploration. She's a marvelous therapist. She is also a hypnotherapist. And we talked for a long time, and we did, I think, all we really did totally in the length of our relationship is maybe a half a dozen regressions, because so much information I can consciously recall, and I have in my books that I've journaled, which is very, very helpful.
Well, that's one thing that I would love to hear about, because I've talked to so many people from different abduction experiences, and they've given me different testimonies, but it's been difficult to get some real intense details. Vague, little bit of details, and
Right.
some pretty good ones even. But I mean, I've asked things like technologies and stuff that you actually brought up, and
Right.
if you could walk us through some of these experiences, like we're actually there looking through your eyes, that'd be fantastic.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Here's one experience now. This appears. Now, understand that I'm not black and white about this. It is not either or for me. When I describe these things, and as I've gone along over the years in exploring this, of course, my vision of what's happening has expanded greatly, of the possibilities. But I find that exploring these things, it's better not to be. Anyway, it's a process of unfoldment, to really seeing the scope of this. And so when I describe these situations, and I'm going to tell you a couple of them where technology appeared, this is to the best of my ability to recollect. But you have to realize that in all these things with experiencers, sometimes I hear people oh, this definitely happened. Well, I think I work with percentages. And as I gauge each experience that I have, according to the state of consciousness I was in and how alert I was, I will tell you this is 20% of probability. This is an 80% probability. Okay? So as far as technology, I very clearly have an experience where it appears that I'm on a craft. I say appears because it's one of those instances where you're in a big circular room. It almost looks like it's stainless steel walls. You see control panels along the side. I see some glass windows with other beings looking through. I'm sitting at a table. It looks like the table is very clear, almost made of acrylic. On these ships, lighting is very diffused. You can never see exactly where the lighting is coming from. The center of this table appears to be emanating light. On the top of the table, in one of the experiences, there's what looks like a clear box. The box is approximately 12, 13 inches long, maybe an inch high, 6 inches wide. It's open, the top lid. It's translucent clear. Again, it looks like plastic or acrylic. There are layers and layers, what looks like almost sheets that you lift up. And as you lift it up, and this box is also emanating some kind of light. As you lift it up, there are very strange symbols that are cut into these plastic sheets. I'm sitting at the table. I have no clothing on. I'm sitting in a chair that is also transparent with a hole in the back. I can't really move at all. Behind me, a small gray is inserting something in my spine, doing something to my spine, because the back of the chair has an open square in it. Across from me is what I came, again, a lot of these references, I only had terms for them after I began to see the picture. The being across with me would be what would be considered a insectoid, looking like a praying mantis. And of all the different species that I've seen, and there's been 7, the praying mantis, even though it is one of the most scary looking sights, is the only one that I have had contact with that emanated any kind of sense of concern or compassion. It is sitting across from me, this being, and it's almost as though we're in a teaching instruction situation. And I am to look at these symbols, to move. I can move my hands, and I move these symbols and look at them, just concentrate on them. Well, this other one is doing something in my spine. So this is what I refer to as the symbol box. What I believe is happening here is that we have, for example, I don't think it was symbols like language. If you looked at these little cutouts on this clear sheet, you would see that in the cutout, there was a membrane inside the cutout. The membrane had an iridescent quality to it. I think somehow each of these symbols contained information, programming, and they were stored inside the symbol in that film. And somehow they would sort of be like one of our little portable drives, except in this case, they could activate that information simply by having me, the human, look at it. Now, whether that was imparting information in me or retrieving information or both, I don't know. But they were doing something as far as information.
What about your spine? That's kind of spooky.
Well, what I recognize as I'm sitting there is it's really painful what they're doing, and so I have at some point, I'm being distracted by this process, this mental process they're doing with me. Well, at the same time they're doing that. These are sneaky little devils, so many of them. The way they go about things, the clandestine nature is not something I appreciate at all. I understand why they do it, because we are a volatile race. They don't know what we're going to do. But most of it, in my experience, has been their agenda and certainly nothing to do with my agenda.
You know what that reminds me of a little bit? That reminds me of the TV show. I just watched the series Shield, and one of the last episodes, her name's Sky, and she's one of the characters that's got these superpowers, and basically this alien devil uses her blood for this certain formula. He basically, and he's like a parasite, so she wants to give him her blood. She's like, yes, master, you take it. But regardless, I'm kind of wondering, what are they doing with stuff out of your back? It reminds me of something like that. Maybe they were taking your fluid or your essence of your...
They were implanting.
Okay.
I think they were implanting is what I think they were doing.
So you think that you probably got nanoparticulates or some type of implants that influence your thinking as well, or just keep track of your...
I think and again, this has been a process over many years now. And I would not have been able to say this 20 years ago. It would have been so far out. But this thing has been slow progression of me opening my consciousness to the probabilities. And so now I believe I do believe there are a number of implants in my body. I am also one of those, until I started exploring what happened with barbalamine is that I have a lot of interest, there's no doubt, and I study a lot of things. I'm very interested in science, and I made a proposition. I said, let's do a book together. And one of the things is my story would be in it a little bit, and then I said, give me your files and let me read 100 files. And because, at that time I had certainly more writing experience than her, and so she said, take the files and all of her notes. Well, I had to sit long nights reading through these files and make my hair stand up on the back of my neck and chills run through me, because this is my first exposure to other experiencers and what they've gone through. Because
were they close to what you did?
I beg your pardon?
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just asked, were they close to the experiences that you had also?
Oh, unbelievable. How could that be? Okay, how could that be? For example, I recall one experience. This is another one of the fully awake, standing up, brushing my teeth in my bathroom. And the light explodes outside my bedroom window. And then suddenly it's a shaft of light inside my bedroom. My dog dives under the bed and then passes out. And this light is filled with these tiny pieces. It's a blue light filled with these teeny tiny pieces of sparkles. Okay, now, I've never before or since seen that kind of light, except in that kind of situation. And then, of course, as I read through these files, I'm finding out somebody, 5 years before, down in Louisiana, describes the exact same.
You know what? I lost the connection again. This is the second time during this interview. No, 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 no. Stand by. I'll tell you, we must be getting into some pretty good stuff here. I love this. Okay, so you were talking about the blue lights, and then you said you read something in Louisiana that was basically exactly the same, and then we got disconnected.
These files, and I was absolutely stunned that there were things that I had never told anybody at that point at all. These are things in my books. I can verify things I've written in books over these years, right, of all these experiences. And now I'm reading the same thing or similar things, events, situations, and these details in these files. So it was very, very eye-opening. As the process went on, I could no longer deny, because I was always looking for a way out of this. I'm a very skeptical, very reluctant experiencer here. And I did not want to have this a part of my life in any way, shape, or form. Nothing to do with it. These experiences for me were traumatizing, frightening, interrupting my life, my good life. It was just a very difficult thing. I went kicking and screaming into it. So this was a big eye-opening thing with her. And we did a few of the regressions originally, a couple of regressions, but one of the things I noted is that I see two different things. Some people say only conscious recollection has value, and others say conscious recollection has no value. Only hypnosis has value. Everybody's got an opinion. We have to find our own way through this and touch base with our intellect and our intuition to find, to find a way to construct this thing as best we can. And as best we can do is just create a hypothesis. There is a bus out there floating around in the cosmos, all these strange little buses, and somebody's driving the bus. And it's the hardest aspect of this. It's one thing to see a UFO and say, I saw a UFO. Even the UFO shut down the silos, right? Okay. But to talk about who's driving the bus, we're on a real fringe of something. Now, I know my state of mind, my state of emotions. I know who I am. And yet at first glance, somebody might hear the stories I'm going to tell and think I'm off in la la land. And I am not. I've been somebody who's always lived with my life, my feet firmly planted on the ground. And yet here I am talking about these things. So slowly, with the files and working on the book, what was interesting and getting to some of the really interesting shifts is that as I began to come into this thing and we wrote the book and the book went out and I started talking at a public level, now something appeared that had never, ever appeared. Now I have many, many, many contacts over the years of a wide variety, okay? Suddenly a new type appears that I've never had before. And it happened once I stood up and talked at a MUFON meeting. All of a sudden, I'm starting to have some very unusual contact experiences. And these contact experiences are human beings, okay? Military. So when we talk about the military intervention and re-abduction, suddenly now this whole new phenomenon comes up because I become a voice for this thing. Drawn attention to myself, I believe.
Do you think you were part of MILABS?
Yes, I do. I have no doubt about it. I mean, it was only when I came to the public level and started actually talking about it and the book was out, then all of a sudden I have the other experiences, but all of a sudden I'm having experiences where military are involved, underground bases are involved. I have missing time and I come back after missing time with this whole recollection of being in this underground base detailed with craft under there with humans and ETs working together. Never did anything like that happen before. Never in all those years. This was a whole different level of introduction. So this is such an amazing, gigantic mystery to solve. And I don't know how long it's going to take for us to do this because everybody says, well, why aren't you taking a picture? Why don't you come back with some sample of something? And even with the human abductions, the MILABS, which of course you're dealing with, is that they also know mind control. They have methods. And so that, we're being hit before we even enter the environment. We're being, we're being controlled in such a way that, our resources for recall and memory and ability to have self-will and act have been compromised. So that, yes, great, you look at something, you say, why can't I grab that and pick that up? Well, I don't know. Why can't I move my arm to grab that? Why can't I take that back with me? Why can't I, And again, let's talk transport. When these take place, if you're talking about with ETs, you're talking about unusual transports. You're talking about going out the window, things dematerialize, very strange stuff happens before these events in order to get to another location. I have one occasion, though, for example, with military helicopters hovering over my house. And I had an experience that night of being taken out of my bedroom. But again, now you're talking about, they use injections, they have other possibilities. What was it, Manchurian Candidate many years ago was done about the ways that they can control us. Humans can control other humans.
Yeah, imagine what they can do now.
Yeah. And so here we are, compromised dramatically. And somebody says, why didn't you take your camera with you and take a picture? Well, you know what? You got to be there. You got to be there.
And I have actually seen, there's a guy that's been on the show before named Boris. He's out in the Bronx, and he actually claims to make contact with ETs on a daily basis. And, most people might just brush him off, but when you look at the video footage that he goes out during the daytime and films, it's shaky because it's on his phone, but he'll zoom in and as much as he can, and you'll see these just weird things pop out of the sky. They'll start changing colors and shapes. For a second, it'll look like a metal disc. Then it'll go back to a red flash. I mean, we've had a gentleman by the name of Mark Brinkerhoff on that's made contact with all sorts of incredible ETs. But see, it's interesting because I talk to people like yourself that have experiences where you see grays and whites and the mantis beings. And then I talk to people like Mark that make contact with like these 7 foot, 8 foot tall Nordics that are, supposedly look like supermodels. And
please, why didn't they call me? Why did they call the others?
Hello, mix that up. Come on, man. Right. So it's like, so I'm just trying to figure out here, okay, how much of this is, 100%, or not even 100%, but how much of this is legit? How much is maybe disinformation? How much does somebody think is real but isn't? Or, so because some of the most incredible things that we have a tough time grasping are the truth. Truth is definitely stranger than fiction. So, and I don't think in any way, shape, or form that Mark or other people that I've talked to are making up stories or lying to me at all. I mean, I just find it fascinating that these different encounters happen where some people are getting their spines injected and then others are like going on spaceships and traveling the cosmos and making friends
But it really does make sense. When you hear this variety, and at first I was disturbed, okay, at first. Now, Barbara Lamb is a very dear friend of mine over the years. We've been good friends, and her experience and the people she's worked with have mostly been positive and spiritually inclined, and they've been good ETs. So, and I've had something very different. So how do we resolve that? I just did an article for JAR Magazine, actually, early this week, and where I was discussing the same issue. And that's that, the question was, are ETs on the planet a positive experience or a negative experience? And I just took a look at the planet. And if we look at the Earth and we see that we have the number of basic customs that we have on the planet, let's say, I don't know, what are there, 10 major religions? And we look at all the different countries, all the different customs, the different religions, okay? Each one has a different view of the world, what's right, what's wrong. Each one has different agendas. And even within a particular belief system, you're going to find a variety of agendas and interests. So why, for me, a principle either is or it isn't. So if we see this principle being manifested on the planet, where we see a great variety of interests and intentions that are quite different, and we see that now, we see with the Islamic extremists, right? We see when they kill, they believe they're doing something positive and good. That's their belief system. They're going to kill all of us infidels, and they think they're really doing something God wants them to do, and they believe that. And then we've got somebody over here, I was watching a show on polygamy the other night, and the way they control and manipulate that society. Why would the vast cosmos that is apparently just alive with a variety of life, why would it be any different? The principle is or isn't. So we've got a variety of races out there in the cosmos, a number of them contacting the planet, and each one could easily have a different agenda, different reason for being here. Their culture could be different. Some could be very benign, some could be neutral, some could have a true desire to help humanity, and others could have a desire to capitalize on the ignorance of humanity. That's the way I see it.
It is kind of like this cosmic makeup of maybe the movie Men in Black. At the end of that movie, when they go into their base underground and they open up the locker, and the locker opens up to an ET world that's bigger, and then that opens up to an ET world that's bigger. Right. It's like, these different fractions. It's pretty cool to think about and the possibilities. And I often wonder, maybe our DNA itself, like whoever helped develop us. I certainly believe in divine providence, but I often wonder, was there a lot of manipulation throughout the millennia that we don't know much about, or maybe the Sumerian tablets that Zechariah Sitchin had deciphered? Maybe there's some truth there to the Anunnaki story. I don't know. I think it's fascinating. But what have you?
What do we have that they would want?
What do we have that they would want?
Yeah, what do we
Okay.
have?
Well,
That's what I had to ask myself. What do humans have that these races that appear to be so technologically advanced?
I can answer that.
I've got an opinion too. Tell me.
I think that I think it's our soul. I think it's our spirit, our spark, our essence. You know, I mean, the Anunnaki story about the gold, yeah, there might be some validity to that, but I think it's more about who we are spiritually. That's my opinion.
Well, mine is similar to that. It's sort of connected to that. I think one of the things that I've noticed is these different varieties. Okay, and to this point, there's 7 of them, and they're very different, that have appeared over all these years. Anyway, what I notice is that they are devoid of the emotional capacities that humans have. And as terrifying as we can be, the other end of it, if we move through that and are able to evolve, you call it spirituality. Yes, absolutely. Spirituality and our emotional component they are devoid of emotion. Any of them that I have seen, that I've personally experienced, have been devoid of emotion. And I've seen mostly those that I have 100% their own agenda, I believe. They're number one. And I believe that they are utterly and completely fascinated with our emotional makeup. Because if you strip away emotions, it absolutely affects your perspective of things about you. You add emotions. Can you, without emotions, really appreciate the beauty and fragrance of a blossom, of a flower, of a newborn baby? They are very mechanical, so many of these races. You know, they're with the hybrids, the things that they're doing, everything they do is mechanical. Why is it that when we humans that are contactees go through really dramatic emotional shifts, for example, the loss of a parent, something dramatic, we have more activity of contact? It draws them in. I believe some of the implants are able to register the chemical components in our body that respond to our high emotions. And it signals them and alerts them, and they check in with us to see what's going on. They're trying to find something in us that is not tangible. They're trying to find it through the body, through the cells. But somehow in our evolution of humanity, apparently, we are more than them, in more than many of those races. You know, I wondered why they think they're so superior. You get this sense of coldness from them, those I've experienced, and yet they're preoccupied, trying to find something in us, trying to manipulate something. I believe, those I have been in contact with, that several of those races have been trying to find a way to obtain this essence without earning it through their own evolution. Can they get what we have got? Yes, we're barbaric on many levels. We do not respect all of life. Humanity does not. We are self-willed and self-driven, but we have a capacity. It's there now within our species. And I think they'd like to have that, and they're trying to find that. Oftentimes, and it's happened with me, and of course later on, once I stepped out and began to study, you find they put us through some of the testing they do is of an emotional nature. They create holograms where you see someone that might have died 20 years before, and they watch you just to observe your reaction and measure it. They're trying to understand that component, which they lack. And they do not appreciate that they lack it. They do not want to earn it, some of these races, through evolution.
That's powerful. I was just thinking about that, what you were saying, the holograms being created of somebody that you knew that might, you know, wow, that's pretty wild. And now you brought up earlier that you have seen these underground bases where they were not only making contact, I mean, they were with military people. Like
Yes.
military. Okay, so we've had Lynn Buchanan on the show before. Are you familiar with him?
Uh-huh.
Really nice guy. He was a part of the Stargate program, a lot of really cutting edge stuff, and one of the real men who stare at goats. But he talked a little bit at the end of the show about how when he was working with a different part of the government or something, his first day he went into this base or this location where there was a bunch of people sitting down at desks, and then he saw this looked like an insectoid sitting down right next to other just people. And,
Right.
and he said, you know, but then I kind of pinned him a little bit more on it. He didn't really want to talk about it a whole lot. And then he kind of said, well, you know, it could have just been them dressing up because they knew it was my first day. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, okay. So maybe, you know, I mean, but anyway, I thought that was pretty interesting. And you brought up the mantis earlier, and you said
Yes.
that was the only one that you felt had any sense of emotion.
Had a sense of not emotion demonstrated on a telepathic level, had a level of compassion for humanity.
Okay.
I sense on a telepathic level.
And that would be a form of an emotion, I would think, wouldn't you?
Compassion, absolutely.
So I think that's a pretty powerful statement. And I've heard from other people that the mantis beings or these sentient entities are actually pretty much at the top of the rung, at the highest levels, and I think that's pretty cool.
Back to the negative or positive, if you're going to look at a positive thing, although I would have rather not been involved in this, I was pursuing other things that definitely kept me interested. What this does is this, of course, puts you on, I realized at some point that any of us that are involved in this is that this is how I decided to stand up. I don't like being mocked or, negated by my beliefs, and standing up in public is not my particular choice. I made a decision to do so with this subject because I realized that any of us involved, that we are standing on the forefront of the evolution of humanity. It's important. It is very important. And it's difficult to comprehend right now. We get scattered pieces across the globe of all these events coming together, and more and more people are speaking up. It's a consciousness of it is beginning to spread into our movies, our media, more and more. But there's still a lot of negativity and mockery out there, and the false information. But we keep on our course. So the fact that you even talk to people like me and all the other people that you've talked to in these extraordinary circumstances suggests that you are somehow part of your evolution is part of this story also, so that you might, if you were to have had experiences, I don't think it would be so strange. It probably would not. Something brought you here. Something opened your consciousness by your experience. So we're standing in the front on the edge of the evolution of humanity. All of our voices are important. I think all of our experiences are important.
We certainly live in amazing times. And could you talk to us more about those encounters that you had when it was actually MILABS type stuff? Do you remember descriptions of these underground bases?
Oh, gosh. Now, all of this, when I did the book with Barbara, only a small portion of my story is in there. This new book coming out has got everything. Now, I'm also an artist, so I have a lot of drawings. And the underground bases, the elevators, the hazmat units that they brought us into, the outfits that they wore, I have everything drawn out. So, for example, I have experienced, now these things are sort of like ET encounters and abductions, but there's ordinary craft involved. You feel like you're getting on a black helicopter. Okay, they begin a little differently. You go out your front door. You don't go through the roof. It's very different. Anyway, one, for example, is in, I'm there and there's one other man there. There's two of us. I don't know this person. We come down a round, transparent, looks like glass elevator. Perhaps it's 6 feet across. It's cylindrical. It comes straight down from a piece of ground. We're on a piece of ground, it's rocky surface, and we go straight down in this elevator. We go through a number of levels. You can see them as they pass through the elevator. And we end up in a room being dressed in, I have a nurse with me. I see this man at the front door. They take him one way. I'm into another room. There's like a regular human nurse. I'm put into a regular patient's gown. I'm led through a corridor. And what's interesting is I'm led through the corridor, and this has happened just the one time that I recall. I'm led through a corridor, and if you've seen what a hazmat unit looks like, they create these tents. They have you walk through tubed hallways. Everything is purified, and so I'm walking through this thing, and he's in another one. You can see through these tubes, and he's walking through another one, guided with somebody. And we go through some kind of disinfecting or something they're doing with us, I'm not sure, to come out the other side. Then we go into this room. I sit in a chair. I'm facing a clear glass window. He's sitting in a chair, probably 3 or 4 feet from me. We have a couple of people standing behind us, and we're looking through this glass. On the other side of the glass is a dark room, and it's filled with perhaps 50 chairs with what looks like military people in a variety of military uniforms looking back at us through the glass. So,
were there other people out there too that you could see that were in the same type of situation you were?
Just the two of us on that occasion.
How far down do you think you went?
Oh, heavens. It's hard to say. I mean, in that particular one, again, what you're going to have here is you're going to check, you're going to have consciousness is you can grasp some events and then you fade out. You come back in, you grab some more, you fade out. And I'm strong in trying to hold on here because of the exercises I've done from the past. And yet I'm going to lose consciousness periodically here. And then I come back and I get some more. You fight your way back. In this particular experience, when this hazmat, and why they were doing this, I have no idea. It suggested to me that I had something inside of me that they, was it an experiment that had been done to me? What was the hazmat about? I have no idea. Anyway, how far in that particular one, I cannot recall. Now, I can recall another one where I saw craft underground, and I have this drawing actually in my book also. The same kind of elevator comes down, and what you see, interestingly enough, is that they have cloned people. There are cloned humans that look just like humans, and I've seen as many as like 6 that are identical. Tall, 6 foot tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an unusual kind of dark blue uniform with a hat. They all have pitch black hair. They have the certain insignia on their sleeve of the uniform they wear.
What was that insignia like?
It's like a patch. It's like a yellow patch, like a V or a bird kind of symbol. I have that in my book also. I don't have the picture in front of me right now to describe it. But they take you to and from rooms, okay? Now, they're only present in the human military events, okay? Which suggests to me, have humans been creating, have they been cloning other humans, period? So in that particular event, we go down, and the cave it's like an underground cave, this particular one, where it's actually, they've come in with big machines. You can see they've gouged out the rock. Okay, and it may come down, say it come down a couple hundred feet, and then you've got walkways that are built all the way around the edge of this big cave. The cave perhaps might be huge. We're talking huge, 1,000 feet across, and they have walkways of metal, iron that are built into the rock, and they can take stairs on the side and go down, but there's an elevator that comes down in the center. And as you go down, you can go down in that elevator and you pass all these different floors. And on one level, as I go down on this other experience, I saw this gigantic craft, huge, massive craft that looked like a combination of our commercial jets and a saucer. Really unusual, with scaffolds around it and both humans and ETs working on it. Then you go down deeper into the next layer. That's kind of a description of one that's been carved out of the rock.
Where do you think that was at?
In the Southwest.
I mean, somewhere around Sedona.
It's in Arizona or New Mexico. I mean, Arizona, New Mexico, maybe even Nevada, by the landscape. That's the only way I could judge it.
Do you think that there are underground tunnels that connect to different bases and locations around the world?
I wouldn't have any experience of that. I don't know. I've read some things, but I don't have any personal experience of that. I've seen the first one that I explained to you that I didn't see how I got there. But I believe it was underground, where the hazmat, where we're dressed up in these outfits and we had to be, cleansed or whatever as we went through there. They kept us separate from everybody. We had that experience. I've had the one I just described where layers and layers are cut out of the rock. Another one that I have seen is, I have seen where one of my experiences, it was a very similar thing where it was carved out, but it was very damp and dark, and they'd actually put what looks like typical buildings on the floor of this gigantic cave. Typical buildings where people were residing in these buildings, humans residing. And it was a completely human facility, completely human. But you could leave that particular big, gigantic cave environment, you could leave it by walkways. They were round, gigantic circular tubes that would go from one cave to another cave. And you had double doors that opened up, and the floor was lifted up a little bit off the ground, and they were like you were walking across, again, these metal gridiron platform. You'd walk across, and at the far end, of that tunnel would be another double doors you go through, and you go into another cavern. Those are the only kind that I've seen. Nothing long distance.
Geez, that's incredible. And I also wonder, like, when was the last time you had an experience that was vivid?
About a year and a half ago. It's been a while.
Uh-huh. And you said the ETs that were working on that craft that looked like a combination of our tech and their tech, were they grays, like worker grays?
No, they were not. I would say they were more some kind of hybrid.
Okay, so they had like big heads, big eyes, human bodies.
No, and I was not close enough to see. This thing is a huge cave, okay? So as I'm going down on this, and I'm going down with one of these cloned male people that I'm going down with, that is in this unusual uniform, right? That I described, that I believe is cloned human of some kind. I'm going down with him. We're not speaking. I'm standing next to him, and it's going very fast as we go down. So I get to see this craft, and I can see now. I'll tell you how big this cave is as we're going down, and I'm looking off at that craft. If I was going to say how big the craft is, that craft would have filled almost the whole width of that cave. But the humans and the ETs or hybrids standing working on it from the distance I was at would only have been about an inch tall. That's how big this thing was. So I'm looking at a distance when I see this thing.
Wow, that's
not close up on it.
That reminds me of that big craft that was seen out in Phoenix, you know, when they had the Phoenix lights situation.
Right.
I wonder if it was the same tech. That's pretty cool stuff. And I certainly can't wait to read this part 2 that you've got coming out, Alien Experiences. I've got to pick up a signed copy of that from you, Nadine, for sure.
Yeah, well, it's going to be quite revealing. It's been a while in the works because I pursue other things too. And what I do notice, you know, you asked me how long has it been, and it's been about as long as it's been since I've been talking about this. I've taken a hiatus from this in order to pursue some other areas of my life. So I haven't done much public talking, anything, in the last year and a half. So as I stay out of it, it seems that I have less contacts. The moment I step into it, and then it seems to arouse it again, and there's much more activity in my life. So by putting this other book out, it is to a certain extent putting myself, potentially in harm's way, if for nothing else but, the disruption of my life again. I accept it as part of my life. I think one important thing that I just want to make a point that I believe in, when I finally came to peace with this subject, and I am at peace, it took many, many years. The way that I came to peace with it is when I had to bring my spiritual life into play with this. And the way that I did that is that, I do believe in an intelligent and loving creator from which all things have come. And I am also a student of quantum mechanics, and I'm trying to understand how material is created, manifested, and so it's sort of a spiritual and scientific point of view that I have, but I had to bring this into my life. I had to find a way to incorporate this into my life. And I have, I think, quite successfully. And by recognizing that the same life force that is within me, within humanity, is also within the cosmos and all living beings. So perhaps it is not so strange that these events are taking place. Perhaps it is just our humanity that needs to rise to the occasion, to become a part of the whole in a greater way. It's really a matter of our recognizing the truth. The truth has always existed. So that as foreign as these lives seem to us and these other races, in the essence, the core of who we are, they are not. The same life force dwells within them as it does within us. So in that regard, I could have some strange sense of understanding and even a glimpse of potential camaraderie with other living beings in the cosmos. And that has greatly helped me in pursuing this.
Well, that's fantastic. And I certainly appreciate you coming on the show with us here at the Leak Project. I know this is some of the most detailed information I've ever had the opportunity to hear about with these abduction experiences, and the fact that you've had so many different types of encounters, I think that's incredible. So, folks, I would definitely recommend, if you want to know more about Nadine and her experiences, check out alienexperiences.com. You can have access to a whole bunch of information on there, and it looks like the site's being updated as well as we speak, but it is available. And she's got the first edition available now on her website as well as Amazon, but your second edition looks like you said is probably coming out in, you said December? September. Great. Okay. Well, fantastic. Once again, really appreciate it. And ladies and gentlemen, make sure to be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear Good night. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and tonight we have guest Nadine Lalich. She entered the UFOlogy realm back in 2004, very skeptical after suppressing over 15 years of her own traumatic contact experiences. And in June of 91, while camping in Sedona, she was removed from a vehicle in fully conscious state by what appeared to be an intelligent, non-terrestrial life forms. So we're going to discuss many of her experiences and the works that she's recently came out with. Make sure to check out her website, alienexperiences.com. You can pick up her new book. Also another one coming out in September called Alien Experiences 2. So Nadine, it's a pleasure to have you on the show this year at the Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm great, Rex. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's fantastic to speak with you. I always enjoy hearing people's testimonies on some of these just incredible phenomenons. I mean, the UFO phenomenon has been around for so many years now, and many people today are starting to just wake up and get out of the suppression zone, I guess you could say, from hypnosis and hearing of other people's testimonies. So if you would, please give us a brief introduction about yourself, and then I'd like to jump into your book and your experiences that you've had with abductions.
Sure, my pleasure. Well, prior to this incident that took place in June of 1991, I really had very little interest or involvement in the UFO arena. I think as a teenager, I read some science fiction books, but it really wasn't a focus of my life at all. I'm also an artist and a writer, so I pursued those areas. And then as an adult, I spent 30 years in the legal field in a variety of positions. So when it came to the UFO phenomenon or the ET contact phenomenon, it just simply wasn't one of my focuses. Certainly was open to it, as I have many interests, but I didn't spend any time on it until that event took place.
Okay. And when I talked to you for a moment before the show, you said that you now realize you've been a lifetime contactee, correct?
Correct.
When was the first experience you remember?
Well, my first experience, there were things as a child that I was not able to relate to until years later when I looked back on it, after I began to process this mystery. But my original experience took place, as I said, in June of 91. I was traveling with a friend. It was a driving trip to Sedona, Arizona. I actually live in that area now, but I was driving from California, and we were going to do some camping in the Oak Creek Canyon area. And we were driving late at night, and we hadn't reached our destination, so we just decided to pull over for the evening. And we found what was actually a daytime picnic area that we drove into. And there were probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen places to park your car. There were a few places to have, there were grills there, and there was a restroom. That was the extent of it. There was no electricity there to hook up to. And there was no people there. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night when we pulled in. And as we settled in, we created a little fire in the grill, and we sat around the fire for a little bit, my friend Pamela and I. And I had a very strange, creepy feeling that we were being watched. Obviously, I couldn't see anything. There were no cars or people around anywhere, but I was uncomfortable. And I was driving in a van. And so we were just going to throw our sleeping bags in the back. We didn't set up a tent or anything and sleep in the back. So I retired first, laid down in my sleeping bag in the back of the van, and then I heard her come in a little bit later. Well, somewhere around 2:30 in the morning, I heard some sounds outside of the van to my right, just outside, as though somebody was walking around. I heard rustling, and I heard what sounded almost like footsteps around. And I sat up. Now, it was pitch black, because obviously there were no lights anywhere. And so I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, literally. And as I sat up, I was trying to listen more clearly to what was going on outside. And quite suddenly, the lights came on in the van. And when they came on, I was quite blinded at first. from being in pitch black, and my eyes were trying to adjust. And as my eyes began to adjust, and of course I'm starting to fill with adrenaline and fear as to what's going on, someone's coming into the van, I see a hand reaching for me. And the first thing I notice is it's not a human hand. It's a very small, long, thin arm with 3 fingers and a thumb at the end of the hand. And it was so close to my face that even I could see the depression where we would have fingerprints. There was almost like a sort of a suction cup on the tips of these fingers. And it was a kind of a pasty gray color. Well, you know, when you have no reference for that kind of event, even though I was fully awake, you still have great difficulty trying to reason with what's happening at the moment. Your brain is looking for answers, the adrenaline's rushing in your bloodstream. So then I had a momentary blackout total that was probably 3 seconds, 4 or 5 seconds. And the next thing I know, now my vision is much better. I'm standing outside with my back to the van. This was one of those, also one of the, it was a Toyota van where also the door lifted upward. So it was upward over me, overhead, and the lights were shining down on me from the door, and there were lights coming from inside shining against my back. I was barefoot, standing rigid. My arms were at my side, and my chin was tucked down so that I could not raise my head, and I realized I was paralyzed. I couldn't move a muscle. And again, you know, of course, your brain is racing, trying to figure out what could be happening here. It's very surrealistic when it goes on, and you're looking for answers and asking yourself questions. And this all happens with, you know, split-second timing. And because my head was tilted down and I could not see forward, I could see to the side where my hands were hanging. Slightly off to each side, I could catch out of my side vision what looked to me like 2 children without hair on their head. And again, without any reference to this kind of phenomenon at that point in my life, I certainly wasn't thinking E.T. I didn't know what it was. They were very small, and I could only see the top of them and straight down, and again, just the edge from my side vision. I could feel the presence of someone in front of me, although I could not raise my head, and but it felt like a large person, very large entity person. I could feel the energy. It was massive. It was not like these 2 small ones. Anyway, I look down and I see these little entities put their little hands underneath my hand, not even touching my hand, but sort of like cupping their hand under mine, and I felt my body raise up off the ground. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 inches. I was raised, certainly raised up. I actually could feel myself levitating up. And then we began to move forward. As we moved forward, I still could not raise my head, completely paralyzed, but upright. I could see again from the side vision as we moved through, and I could still see the light shining from behind me with the van door open. I could see more of these small little beings off to the side watching. The next sense that I recalled was I could not raise my head, but things were hitting my face. Something kept hitting my face and my body as we were moving through, and I could see we were like moving through the forest, sort of, and something kept hitting my face. Later on, I realized what was hitting my face was branches. So some of the low-lying branches did not hit them because they were so much shorter than me, but they were hitting me at the top of my head. Then
they were transporting you through the forest, essentially.
Correct. Then I blacked out. The next memory that I have is of feeling like I'm being dropped and a big loud whoosh sound, and I come bouncing onto the top of my sleeping bag inside the van with the door closed in pitch black. My legs are folded crisscross as they were exactly as when I first woke up, and I'm sitting back in that same position, upright, and I literally feel physically like I've just been dumped right back on top of that sleeping bag, and drenched in sweat, completely panicky. I had like a night t-shirt I was wearing, and I was drenched to the bone, shaking, on the verge of hysteria, crying, attempted to wake up my friend. At that time, it was somewhere around 3:30 in the morning, so I know it was about an hour that it happened that I was gone, and I could not wake her up. And I did everything I could, shaking, calling out to her. Nothing would rouse her. And I found myself in an amazing state of mind because my whole reality was